Well, Russia and Canada are neck and neck in a race for the Arctic's rich resources.
Essentially, it's a large real estate deal.
Now, this document also lifts a ban on certain parts of the Arctic being surveyed for oil and gas.
The world is changing. We have more open ocean now than in the history of the world. This new ocean is vast and full of rich, untouched resources. The Arctic is changing fast, but can the world keep up? Recent research has shown that the Arctic has warmed by 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. That temperature is twice the global average. While there are variations from year to year, the trend is clear. The Arctic is melting, and it presents new economic opportunities for the Arctic nations and nations beyond. The Arctic was once completely covered in ice. Now, the ice is thinning and receding, which means more of the ocean is accessible and gives access to previously unattainable resources. These resources are important for economic development and are wanted by many. So what does this mean for the nations around the globe? It means there is a new final frontier. No, not one in space, one right here, above all our noses. It's the Arctic. And the question is, who gets to claim it? The northern regions of the world have always been regulated by treaties, doctrines, and local laws. Since the 17th century, a freedom of the seas doctrine was accepted by most nations. This doctrine limited a nation's rights and jurisdiction to the narrow area of sea along the nation's coastline. The remainder of the ocean was considered a common property that could be used by anyone. This treaty was assembled before anyone had the ability to exploit offshore resources and before the development of a global economy, which meant easy exploitation and global development. With time and technological advances, oil companies then became capable of drilling in deep water and ideas for seabed mining. All kinds of resources like diamonds and zinc seemed possible. Any nation that claimed a greater distance from the shore also made claim to the valuable seafloor resources. With the possibility of access to billions of dollars, Arctic nations are now currently jostling for ownership of the region's frozen seas and the resources that lie there. From national claims to literally marking one's territory with the nation's flag, these countries are showing that they are willing to fight for it. In 1945, the United States announced that it was assuming jurisdiction of all natural resources out to the edge of its continental shelf. This was the first nation to depart from the freedom of the seas doctrine, and other nations quickly followed. Nations began making unilateral claims to seafloor resources, fishing grounds, and exclusive navigable zones. Chaos was beginning to rise, and the need for regulation was crucial. In 1982, the United Nations brought forward the Law of the Sea Treaty to bring order and equity to the chaos of the seas. With over 150 nations participating, it was the first attempt by the international community to establish a formal agreement on how the seas can be used. Looking directly at the treaty signed, we can learn how nations mitigate disputes and land claims. Under the Law of the Sea, each country receives exclusive economic rights to any natural resource that is present on or beneath the seafloor out to a distance of 200 nautical miles beyond their natural shorelines. In the Arctic, this gives Canada, the United States, Russia, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland a legal claim to extensive seafloor areas. But here's where things get complicated. In addition to the 200 nautical mile economic zone outlined under the Law of the Sea, each country can extend its claim up to 350 nautical miles from its shoreline, if those areas can be proven to be an extension of that country's continental shelf. Continental shelves are extensions of the main land. They extend until a drop-off point is reached. To make this claim, a nation must acquire extensive geological data that documents the geographic extent of its continental shelf and submit it to a United Nations committee for consideration. This is completely unlike any other land claims in the world because it is submitted to and reviewed by the UN. In any other situation, land claims are submitted to the governing body of the land and they get the final say. The 6 nations bordering the Arctic Circle are currently trying to lay claim to regions of the Arctic. They are mapping the seafloor to provide evidence of their claim. Norway and Iceland are the only countries to have the claims approved by the UN so far. There are also countries like China, who do not share any borders with the Arctic, but recognize the power, money, and potential the Arctic brings. There are 2 main reasons for demand in the Arctic: the opportunity for new shipping routes and the potential of oil, gas, and other precious resources. Within the next few decades in summer, it may be possible to sail across the top of the Earth in a regular vessel, and not in a nuclear icebreaker. Currently, Russia has at least 5 operational icebreakers compared to America's 2. By 2035, Putin wants Russia to have 13 icebreakers, and 9 of which will be nuclear powered. But why invest so much in these icebreakers? What's in it for them? For journeys between Europe and Asia, the Northern Sea Route can already be 2 to 3 weeks faster than the Suez Canal, which is currently the main passage used by cargo ships. By cutting straight across the Arctic, the Transpolar Passage could save a further 2 days. These changing conditions offer an opening to shipping companies across the globe. The Arctic is potentially a faster, more direct route between Asia and ports in Europe and Eastern North America. Currently, there is relatively little cargo shipped through the region, but this is projected to increase over the next decade, especially with countries like Russia and China actively getting involved. Russia wants the Northern Sea Route to eventually rival the Suez Canal as a passage between Europe and Asia. A big part of Russia's securing the Northern Sea Route is with Zovkomflot, also known as the SCF Group. The SCF Group is Russia's largest and one of the world's leading shipping companies. They have a strong track record of shipping operations in the Arctic and have significant expertise in Arctic shipping. The SCF Group has been a leader in developing the Northern Sea Route and believes it provides a commercially viable and environmentally safe shipping route. The commercial attractions will only increase as infrastructure and hydrocarbon projects are developed in the Arctic region. In the long term, only companies that provide high-quality transport services to international standards are likely to be successful in this region, and the SCF Group hopes to be one of those companies. China also wants to get involved with the Arctic, especially with the oil and shipping routes. Tens of billions of dollars in Chinese investment capital has flowed into oil and gas projects in Siberia and the Russian Arctic offshore. New shipping routes are being tested, and state-owned mining companies have acquired rich mineral deposits in Greenland. Since 2013, a Chinese shipping company, COSCO, has made 22 commercial voyages through the Arctic and Northern Sea Route. COSCO's cargo volume is estimated to increase significantly in the upcoming decades. The Arctic doesn't just have the potential for faster shipping routes. The Arctic is also home to untapped oil. The United States Geological Survey estimates that up to 25% of the world's remaining oil and natural gas resources might be held within the Arctic region, and Russia wants it. The Russian government is currently offering billions of dollars worth of tax cuts to companies who will pursue natural resource extraction in the Arctic. Rosneft, an oil company controlled by the Russian government, has been heavily involved in mining oil from the Arctic region. Rosneft is the largest global public oil and gas corporation and operates in 25 countries. Rosneft hopes to create an Arctic oil cluster that would include an Arctic oil pipeline. This plan would have up to 100 million tons of oil pipelined out of the Arctic by 2030. Rosneft is sure that their oil cluster, which will help them dominate the global oil industry even further, will also help boost shipments in the Northern Sea Route. Russia has had the most developments and securitization of Arctic resources compared to any other country. They also have begun development on building their additional icebreakers, an Arctic cluster that promises billions of future revenue. As the only state bordering the Arctic that is not involved with NATO, Russia has made military buildup in the Arctic a priority. Some defense analysts and academics predict that the territorial disputes, military presence, and race for natural resources have primed the Arctic for a new Cold War. The changing conditions offer an opening to shipping companies. According to their official policy paper, China's goals are to understand, protect, develop, and participate in the governance of the Arctic, so as to safeguard the common interests of all countries and the international community in the Arctic, and promote sustainable development of the Arctic. As long as there is still a global demand for oil and gas, each nation will not stop until they get their share. There will still be explorations into new areas rich in fossil fuels. But in addition to the equation, more land also equals to more economic viability. Sustaining current and projected rates of Arctic oil and gas could transform local economies and global energy dynamics. Energy analysts say that investment in the Arctic will impact profitability, including global commodity prices, exploration and production technologies, geographic access and infrastructure, legal and political climates, and environmental concerns. Mineral resources are also found in vast quantities throughout the Arctic. And as mentioned before, shipping lanes are opening as the Arctic Sea retreats. This is easier for shipping companies and countries alike to explore potential new trade routes. And before you know it, there will be an increase in fishing in the Arctic. While there is little evidence to see how much exactly Arctic fishing stocks would increase, it is very likely that fish will migrate to the north as waters warm in the south. The Arctic is brimming with economic potential. The region has significant natural resources and potential as a maritime trade route. It's likely that the region will experience further growth as the Arctic becomes increasingly accessible. The thawing Arctic is emerging on the world stage. But can the thawing Arctic also be an emerging place to live in? Its economic opportunities are evident. The pipelines are attracting the human species, and besides, the Arctic is not so cold anymore to the point where the North Pole can actually be seen. As the years progress, what would the Arctic's condition be like? Will the Arctic's population increase? Will the people soon move there, as well as build their lives, families, and businesses? Instead of planning a life on Mars, should we start planning a life on the Arctic? The world has always had an idea of what they think the seafloor holds. But will the melting ice and exploration in the Arctic lead to new discoveries? The prospects of new resources has begun. How is the world going to take advantage of this? How are you going to take advantage of this?